Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Foster Files, a podcast about animal rescue and welfare. My name is Kelly, and every week I talk about issues surrounding animals in this country and to the people who are passionate about making their lives better. On the podcast today is Penny Ellison from the Animal Advocacy Academy and the Animal Advocate podcast. Penny is an attorney and professor based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and works to educate, legislate, and advocate for animal rights. Hi, Penny. So nice to talk to you today. How are you?
Great to be with you, Kelly. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. So Penny does the Animal Advocate podcast, and I am going to put the link to her show in the show notes. But if you're not already listening to it and you're interested in animal welfare, I encourage you to subscribe to her show. She has this incredible format where she speaks about these incredibly complicated issues surrounding animal welfare and animal legislation. And she really puts it down into something that even somebody like myself, who is nowhere near legal, can understand. So I love listening to your podcast and learning all the information about the advocacy work that's going on in the animal welfare space. Why don't you tell how you got started in animal advocacy?
Well, sure. And I appreciate that you like the podcast because the goal is really to convince people who are not lawyers and don't have connections to politicians that they can make a difference. So I started in animal law and advocacy in 2006 when I started teaching an animal law seminar at my alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania Law School. They had students who were petitioning for an animal law class because they wanted to learn about it and they didn't have any faculty that knew about it. So at the time, I was a lawyer in private practice, just doing regular business litigation and having nothing to do with animals, but thinking that I was interested in it. And so I put together a syllabus and they said, sure, come teach it. And I've been doing that for now 20 years and supervising a pro bono project at the law school called the Animal Law Project, where the students get their required service hours through doing work for animal-related nonprofits. I've also been on the board of the Pennsylvania SPCA since, I think, 2012. And I have run an organization called Hand to Paw that brings young people experiencing homelessness or aging out of foster care together with shelter animals and animals in need in the community, and gives them job and life skills training, helping the animals. But as of, I guess, the beginning of this year, I started doing Animal Advocacy Academy and the podcast full time and lobbying for legislation both in my city in Philadelphia and statewide to help animals. But like I said, the purpose of the podcast is really to interest people in talking to their legislators, and especially also in getting involved locally, because I think people look at big issues and what's happening in Washington and think that they can't affect it. But you can absolutely affect animals in your community just with local ordinances that make things better for them.
What makes animal law different than, let's say, law that is advocating for, say, children, right? Because when I think of animal advocacy, and I think of companion animals specifically, though it obviously stretches well beyond companion animals, I think of us talking about it in a similar way that we talk about children. So what makes animal law unique and the work that you do unique in that space?
I think it is uniquely challenging because the animals can't talk. So you don't have the testimony of the victims of bad treatment. It also, I think, tends to sometimes be received by legislators, judges, as less important than other issues, especially if we're talking about animal cruelty. So at the Pennsylvania SPCA, we enforce the animal cruelty laws in, I think, 18 counties across the state. And it can sometimes be challenging to have judges and district attorneys take it as seriously as they do crimes against humans. So I think that's what makes it uniquely challenging.
Why do you think that's the case. Do you think that this is a cultural shift that needs to happen, or it is happening, I think, hopefully? Or do you think it's just that it just doesn't get as much attention because it just doesn't get as much attention? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, it's funny because I think in your world and in my world, it gets a lot of attention. I mean, if you look at any of
Right,
my social media feeds, that's all that's on there. But to other
right.
people, I think it's kind of a foreign concept. But I think that what we need to do as advocates, I think advocates need to stop saying things like, I hate people, or, I only care about animals. I don't care about people. I think what we have to do to get, for instance, our legislative priorities up to the top of someone's list is to say, hey, this is not just about animals. It's about human welfare as well. I mean, a lot of the reasons, if I'm interested, say, in helping animal shelters, which means, of course, reducing their intake, making sure that so many animals don't come into the shelters. Well, why are animals coming into shelters? A lot of the reasons revolve around community, economics, human problems. So that, some of my legislative initiatives have to do with helping people of limited means keep their pets, because, the pet is much better off if that person doesn't have to go to the shelter and surrender. But maybe they can't afford a spay-neuter surgery. So their animal ends up having puppies, and then there's more animals in the shelter. So maybe we need to figure out a way to have the government subsidize spay-neuter surgeries in a way that so fewer animals come into the shelter. Maybe we need to, another one of my initiatives is allow veterinary telemedicine, allow veterinarians to establish, it's called a veterinary client-patient relationship virtually, because there are people who live in veterinary deserts. There are people who are elderly or disabled who have pets. There are people who have no transportation or who can't take off from work. And it's really not possible for them to get vet care. And rather than say surrender their pet or have them suffer not getting care, I'd love to have a veterinarian be able to see them virtually and decide whether this is something they can actually diagnose virtually or not, and maybe provide some assistance. So I think the way, I think when you had Senator Piscitano on your show, and I thought one of the things that he said that I think everybody should get in their head is most animal law issues are bipartisan. They make sense to people. You get a lot of support for them, but they still don't go anywhere because they don't get high enough on the priority list. So that means you have to tie it to human welfare, and you have to be a squeaky wheel. You have to make your voice heard, because they do keep track of, how many emails did I get? I'm hearing from my constituents on this issue. And I think that's a message that we need to get out to people, is that you can make a difference just by making a phone call and saying, I'm watching to see how you're voting on this bill because I'm in favor of it.
So I want to go back to the telehealth thing that you said, because I that is so interesting to me that you brought that up as a legislative topic. I personally, I would think that realistically, if you have a vet's office that is interested in launching telehealth or wants to launch telehealth, as long as they had the technology surrounding it, I wouldn't think there would be any legislative or laws restricting that option for them. But it sounds like you're implying that there are.
Yes, there's a Veterinary Practices Act in Pennsylvania. And there are a lot of national organizations, ones supported by Walmart, and establishing these kinds of online services. And some aren't doing it in Pennsylvania because they look at the law and say it doesn't permit it. Others seem to interpret it like it does permit it, which is, I think, one of the reasons to support a law, is because, if people are doing it now and there aren't any guardrails around it, it'd be better to have a law that says, this is how and when you can do it. Because some of the controversial things are about, like, how long can you give someone a prescription for if you haven't seen them physically? So some states say, well, you can give them a prescription for 14 days. If they need an antibiotic, they need something for their ears, they need something that's kind of apparent to you through the screen. But, it can only be for so long, or you can't do a controlled substance. And I think, so it is important, I think, to have it in the law, what's allowed and what's not allowed, because, there are a lot of there's a lot of animal suffering that comes from very simple issues. I interviewed a vet on my podcast who has done, she's licensed in Pennsylvania, but she's in North Carolina now. So she's done a fair amount of helping disadvantaged people and helping them virtually. And she said sometimes things like behavior issues are actually easier to treat virtually because I can see the animal in their space. And so she said, so I can say, if someone's saying, I'm thinking of giving up my cat because they won't use the litter box anymore. She gave that example and said, well, show me where the litter box is. Well, it's too close to your washing machine, or it's not private enough, or something that might be why your cat is not using it. And so there are some things that are actually easier to treat virtually. And I think that what we need to do is trust veterinarians to know what they can treat virtually and what they need to refer somebody to a brick and mortar facility for.
I mean, you would think if we're trusting physicians to do it, it would make sense that we have an opportunity to trust veterinarians to do it. And I mean, I would think that vets are prescribing. I mean, I know that they're prescribing controlled substances for animals, but I would think that percentage-wise, it's potentially less. You're less likely to have Fluffy get addicted to Oxy. I mean, maybe. I mean, obviously, we're talking about Fluffy's
but
owner.
I think you're
exactly
right that we permit doctors to do it and we don't permit veterinarians to do it. And we should have that. We should have that trust in their professional capability.
Are vets advocating for this themselves as well? Are we seeing that in the industry?
Some yes and some no. I think the PVMA, which is the Pennsylvania Veterinary Medical Association, is not currently for this. I think but they only represent about 40% of the vets in PA. I think there are a lot of vets in PA, especially shelter vets, who see animals after they have had a condition that could have been caught and treated early, that now it has become either expensive or untreatable after time. I think there are a lot of shelter vets like that would support this bill. So that's what we're going to work on.
Yeah, I love the idea of that. Thanks for talking to me through that, because I did not realize that was a legislative issue. So how can somebody like myself, who cares about animal welfare, both companion animals, non-companion animals, wildlife, farm animals, who cares a lot and sees all these issues as common sense issues and things that should be dealt with in my state, how can somebody like myself get involved in a way that is actually helpful in these animal advocacy spaces?
Okay, I have two thoughts about that. One of which is I realize it's intimidating. It was intimidating for me in the beginning. So I've been involved since about 2013 in getting laws passed. I got the cost of care law passed at the state level that allows shelters that seize animals in cruelty case to recover their costs of caring for the animals while they're in their custody before the criminal case ends, because that sometimes can be a year or two down the road. This year, since I've been doing this full time, we passed in Philadelphia the moratorium on unlicensed dog breeding and the ban on horse and carriage rides. So in going through all those processes, I learned a lot. So I actually recorded a podcast series that it's called The 4 C's of Legislative Advocacy for Animals. I'll give you a link to that too, so you can put it in your show notes, and it's free. And it's sort of a framework I put together that helps you create a bill that makes sense to legislators and get coalitions together to help you get it passed and get it over the finish line. So suggestion number one is to listen to that private podcast series. I think suggestion number two is think locally, because you have a lot more influence over your local legislators. Think about how many constituents each one has. And whether it's your county commissioners or your township people, you can get something passed locally. Like there are a lot of people working. I know you interviewed Suzanne Gonzalez. There are a lot of people working on local ordinances that ban the sale of puppies, kittens, and other animals in pet stores. And local ordinances, not only do they obviously affect the animals in that jurisdiction, they also set the stage and create the momentum for state laws to get passed. So I think that's a great idea. You know, if you have many fewer constituents to worry about and 10 animal advocates come to you and say, we don't want people to be able to sell puppies and kittens and rabbits in our town, I think there's a really good shot that you can get it passed, because it has been pending at the state level for years in the form of a bill called Victoria's Law. It has not yet passed, but it's always helpful to make an argument in Harrisburg. Well, here are all the cities that have already passed it, that people think that it's a good idea. I know Suzanne's organization is pushing for all animals to be banned. I think that's great. But if you can't get that, get as close as you possibly can. Because in my view,
right, chip away at it.
There are responsible breeders, but responsible breeders don't sell to pet stores. Responsible breeders want to know that the people that are getting their puppies understand the breed, are prepared to provide for their needs. They agree to take the puppy back if it doesn't work out at any point in the future. And that's not what a pet store does. So I think that that's a great place to start.
Tell me a little bit about the moratorium in Philadelphia on the unlicensed breeding. Because to me, the idea that we have licenses and we don't have licenses, in my mind, if you are unlicensed, you aren't breeding, and you shouldn't be breeding, right? That's the whole point of having that license. So why was that step necessary to say, if you are not licensed, you can't breed? Like, tell me a little bit about the story around that.
Sure. Well, Councilwoman Cindy Bass, I think it was really her brainchild, because she was sitting on the board at ACT Philly, and she was trying to figure out, how can we have fewer dogs coming into the shelters? And I think people are surprised that puppies are coming into the shelter. Sick puppies are coming into the shelter because they haven't been vaccinated against parvo and whatever, and they are getting very sick and sometimes not making it. So she came up with this, we have these people that are breeding. The answer on the licensing is done at the state level. And until you cross the threshold of 26 or more dogs in your household facility per year, you don't have to get a license. So there are people that produce 1 or 2 litters a year, and they don't have to be licensed. There are a lot of other people who might produce more than that, but they don't step forward and apply for a license, and it's very hard to find them. So what we crafted was, it's basically illegal to have a litter in the city of Philadelphia unless you are licensed. So people complained and said, well, I don't cross over the 26 dogs per year, so I shouldn't have to get a license. But the state dog law will license you if you apply, no matter what. It costs $100. All you have to be willing to have your facility inspected to make sure, it's clean and you're taking decent care of the animals. But even if you only produce a litter a year, you can get a license. So that's why we said you're exempt if you're willing to step forward, have your facility inspected, and get a license. But if not, no puppies. And it passed city council unanimously, which was kind of surprising. I was really pleased and proud of our Philadelphia advocacy community that came out, because there were at least 3 hearings, and they came out in force with signs. And when the public was allowed to comment, they all went up and commented, and it was terrific. And what I've been working on since then, that was February, what I've been working on since then is putting together a subsidized spay-neuter program to support that moratorium. Because there were people who objected, saying, that there are people who can't afford to spay-neuter. You're putting in place a punishment for people who are poor, essentially. So a private funder stepped forward, and we're putting together we have together now a subsidized spay-neuter program where there's 3 facilities. You can go and get either low cost or free spay-neuter shots updated and everything. And we're going to keep track of the results of that program with the hopes of selling it to be a statewide program that the state would then figure out a way to fund. And I have an idea about that too, because there are other states that fund spay-neuter program with a fee on pet food manufacturers that sell in the state. So it doesn't It doesn't cost the state any money. It's not a big expense to the manufacturers. It's like $100
Mm-hmm.
per brand, and it generates enough money that you can get grant programs to allow people to access spay-neuter programs.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe Delaware is one of those states.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it made all the difference.
Yeah. I was talking to an animal advocate she's currently in Tennessee. She used to be in the Pittsburgh area, and I know her through her friend, Kimmy Rasky, and she was talking about the subsidized program that they're attempting in the state of Tennessee with the same language around it, the same funding ideas around it. And it really sounds like she's starting to get some legs down there.
That's terrific. I didn't know it was going forward in Tennessee. It's in Delaware and it's in, New Mexico. Maryland has some good data because they've had it for quite a while. I spoke on a panel last year with the head of the program in Delaware and in New Mexico. And the New Mexico program got sued by the pet food manufacturers, but they ended up prevailing, but they held it up for years. But it made the difference because they've had funding mechanisms before, like you'll see a special license plate that says spay or neuter your pet, or in Delaware, they add $3 to rabies vaccines. But those generate maybe $50,000 a year, which is not enough to spay a lot of animals. But the pet food manufacturer fee can generate 7 figures a year. And then you can make meaningful grants in the areas where there's really an accessibility problem and the shelters are really overcrowded, and try to get that result that you're looking for, which is lower shelter intake.
It's interesting because I am glad that I asked about the moratorium and licensed versus unlicensed, because as a foster working with a rescue that is foster based, we recently had a bunch of knowledge come down from the animal control officer in our county, and there was this idea that they said you cannot foster more than 25 dogs in a given year. And it's interesting because I don't think anybody really knew where that number came from, and it felt kind of arbitrary. And they said, well, does $25, is that like individual dogs? Does the litter count as one? Like, how is that? But now I'm understanding, because essentially when you get past that 25 number, you're now considered in that commercial space, and you have to have a totally different license.
Well, you have to have a license, but they do. There are lots of foster-based rescues that are licensed. Because
they're licensed, but I guess there's something in the enforcement where us as the individuals, where we're considered like the satellites of the rescue. We individually, like, I can't have more than 25 dogs in my home in any one given year, because then now I become the commercial side of things. Does that make sense?
You wouldn't necessarily be a commercial kennel, but you need your own license.
Yes. Exactly. So when you have a foster that does a lot of litters of puppies in a year, they foster them, obviously. They're not breeding them, obviously. But when they have fostered 25, they have to put a hard stop in it, and they can't foster anymore for the calendar year.
That makes sense. I never thought about it from that perspective.
Well, and we didn't know where that number was coming from. So now I have an opportunity to share that with the rescue, because I think a lot of people were kind of like, well, if I get, 3 litters of 6, 7, 8, I'm going to be at that number real quick. And plus I add mom, I'm going to be out fostering for the year. And I think there was some frustration surrounding, not knowing where that came from. So I'm happy to be learning and be sharing.
And I want to make clear, it's not a ban. Like you might have to apply for your own license. I'm not sure whether you could come up under the rescue license or not, but it's not a ban. It's not a big amount of money. And if you foster that many animals, you're kind of subject to inspection anyway by dog law. So I would make sure it doesn't stop anybody from fostering.
No, and I don't think it is stopping anybody from fostering. I think there was just this idea that I think a lot of people that do foster regularly, and I'm sure you can attest to this, they want to say yes to every dog that they absolutely can. So this idea that they have to have this hard stop because of a law that they don't necessarily know what's coming from or understand it can feel very frustrating when you know that there's a need and you know that your home is available, but you hit 25 in October and this dog needs a place to go in November. And I think that's where that frustration is coming from. So it's the people that are doing the work and are fostering that we're going, I don't understand that. So now I'll get an opportunity to pass that along, which is always good to pass along good information. So that work that you do in that legislative space, it's not limited to just companion animals, right?
Well, so far I have been mostly companion animals because, in this state is much more challenging to do anything for farm animals.
Mm-hmm.
I am working on some hopefully upgrades to the cruelty law, which does somewhat cover more animals than just dogs and cats, certainly. But agriculture is very aggressive about getting exemptions to all these laws. So unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
it is. It does not cover animals in agriculture.
And there's a lot of money backing the farmers and things like that. So it already has that
For
economy
sure.
around it, which I talked about with Allie Taylor from Voters for Animal Rights when it came to like banning octopus farming. She's like, we don't have it here and we don't ever want it. We don't ever want an economy surrounding it where it'll, be something that we can't get rid of then later. So that's interesting too. As far as the cruelty law is concerned, are you working with Natalie Awesh from Humane Action Pennsylvania about the registry that they're
That
working
is
on?
funny. I have a call with them on Wednesday. I have not worked with them yet, but I hope to work with them. I drafted a law, I guess, back in 2018 that it deals with dogs left outside in extreme weather conditions because I think our cruelty law now is very weak on a describing of the shelter that you have to have. And a lot of cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg all have better standards for very specifically what shelter you need to provide if it's below a certain temperature
Mm-hmm.
or if there's a weather warning. So I am working on that, and I think that I'm going to talk to Humane Pennsylvania about housing issues because one of if you're in our space trying to keep families together and stop them from having to surrender their pets, one of the big issues that comes up again and again are housing issues because a lot of housing says it's pet friendly, but they have breed bans on most of the breeds that end up in shelters, or they have weight restrictions so that you can't have any dog over 20 pounds or something, which
Mm-hmm.
most I will certainly there are small dogs in shelters, but most of the dogs that really have a problem sorry most of the dogs that really have a problem getting out of a shelter uh, are the larger dogs.
Right.
So I know I'm going to talk to them, but it's a really thorny issue to try to fix in a housing market like we have now, where the power is really all with the property owner because there aren't really enough
Mm-hmm.
units. So I definitely, and you can't. Well, I don't think you can force a property owner to allow pets in their property. Um, so it's a challenging issue to try to figure out how to make a dent on. So I'll be working with them on that.
Yeah, Natalie is really knowledgeable. One of the things that she and I talked about, and I'd love to get your perspective on it, especially since you're on the board of the Pennsylvania SPCA, is there does seem to be a gap in some ways between the laws that are in place to protect companion animals, and the example I always use is my knowledge of Libre's law. So there does seem to be a gap between the law itself and the enforcement of that law, because I do see a lot of conversation on, say, social media about, it's below. Well, we've had a lot of really hot days in Pittsburgh this summer. Pittsburgh's been very hot this summer. Thank you, climate change. But there's been a lot of really hot days, and there's a lot of people going, this dog does not appear to have water. This dog does not appear to have shelter. I called my local law enforcement and they're saying they can't do anything. And I'm just wondering what your perspective is around that gap that seems to be there between legislation and enforcement.
Well, I'm happy to talk about this because this is, a pet issue of mine because it's extremely important. And can you think of any other criminal law that the enforcement of which is not funded by public money? It is almost entirely funded by nonprofits who have to raise the money to enforce the law. And it's also probably the most, if not, one of the most, if not the most expensive laws to enforce. Because if you come out and there are animals in horrific condition, if you have a hoarder we've had hoarders with 100, 200 cats. We've had
Mm-hmm.
people with horses. Then you have to seize horses who are starving and provide them with medical care. it can very quickly get into six figures and sometimes seven figures. So I think the biggest reason why there are laws saying this is cruelty to animals, but sometimes it's not enforced, is there's no public money to do it. And the nonprofits are raising money as fast as they can, but they only have as many officers and vehicles and stalls and kennels as they can afford to finance. And it's a challenge. And like we talked about, most of the shelters now are full. So it doesn't mean that you turn your back on cruelty, but it's difficult for a lot of especially smaller shelters to figure out, well, there's 12 dogs there that in a perfect world we would seize, but we have nowhere to put them and we can't afford to provide them all with vet care.
It's interesting. I had the same conversation with Stephen from York County SPCA, and he said, we don't get funding from the state. We have all these contracts with all these, I think he said they have contracts, open intake contracts with something like 18 municipalities or something of that. Please don't quote me on that. I'm just trying to remember from like my interview with him over a month ago. But, and he's like, but we don't actually get any funding to support those contracts. So we still have to do our own fundraising to support the fact that we have to take in from the animal control in these counties. And we have the contracts to take in from the animal control in these counties. So it sounds like the disconnect is not just between legislation and enforcement, but between, public and private funding.
100%. And there are actually two different problems, which is animal control and animal cruelty enforcement. So what Stephen Martinez was talking about there from York County is they may have contracts with municipalities to do their animal control, which means they will take all the stray dogs and that come out of their county. And they might get some money for that, but it's not enough money to cover the cost of doing the work. So they would have to fundraise more to do that, even though that's really a public safety function. That's something that should be funded by the government, and it's not. Mm-hmm. So we have the animal control function. Pennsylvania is unusual in that municipalities do not have to provide animal control. So many of them just decide not to. Like I am of the mind that wherever you live, if you see like a stray injured dog, there should be somebody that you can call whose job it is to pick up that dog and get them some help. But there are plenty of places in Pennsylvania where that's just not the case because the municipalities don't have to, so some decide not to. And the ones that do decide to provide it, often they'll contract with a nonprofit and they'll give them some modest amount, but it's not enough to cover the cost of doing the work. So that's animal control. But then also animal cruelty is pretty much delegated to Humane Society police officers that work for nonprofits. And the police can enforce the law, but the police have no kennels. They have no veterinarians. They can knock on a door and tell somebody they're in violation. They can write them a ticket. They can ask a nonprofit to take the animal in, but they don't have any facilities to really fix that problem. So it's and it's pretty much, there's a good example of how you can come up with something common sense. It's pretty impossible to go to the state now and say, well, you've never funded animal cruelty enforcement or animal control, but you ought to now, because you have a lot of competing funding priorities. Like I mentioned, if you're asking for money for animals, there are people asking for money for schools and police and all these other, better roads and all these other competing things. So when we make a proposal saying something like we should be subsidizing spay-neuter surgeries or veterinary care, you need to come up with a funding mechanism that works. That's where that pet food manufacturer fee comes in. It's challenging. It's easier to fix the cruelty law and make it more specific about what people need to do. It's harder to do the things that require spending money.
How do you stay in this world and stay sane? I talk to a lot of people who are in the animal welfare and the animal advocacy space, and it would be reasonable to get burnt out by the mountains of hurdles that you're talking about, and knowing that because of those hurdles, animals and people are suffering. So how do you navigate that? You've been doing this for 20 years. It doesn't seem like you have any signs of slowing down or stopping anytime soon. So how do you keep yourself, going through all of that?
It's funny. So when I started running Hand to Paw, back in the beginning, I would go to weekly volunteer sessions with young people who were living in a homeless shelter. They would bring them to the shelter, and we would interact with dogs and cats and spend a few hours there just doing what we could. But we were only there for 2 hours. And if there are 100 dogs in the kennel, maybe we took out 5. And a lot of people would say, well, God, don't you feel terrible for the rest? But, I did manage to say, but those 5 are going to have a much better night because we were there and we were taking them out. And if everybody would do that, then there would be a lot less suffering. So that's part of it. And I think from an advocacy perspective, you have to realize that you're in it for the long game. And if not you, then who? Like, I don't desire to sit around in retirement and well, maybe drink some wine, but if I've had a hard day doing advocacy work first, you have to take your small wins. You are not. I was shocked. I mean, those 2 Philadelphia ordinances that passed this year, they passed in a matter of a few months. And normally legislation at the state level works more like a soap opera. Like you can leave it for a year and come back, and it's pretty much not much has changed in the plot. So you just have to keep your eye on the long game and realize that you won't win every battle.
I love the idea of taking the wins as you get them. It's really easy to focus on the other 95 dogs that got left in the kennel and not focus on the 5 dogs. It's easy to focus on Victoria's law that hasn't passed in however municipalities and not focus on the moratorium on unlicensed breeding that you guys did pass. So I think that's really great advice for people in animal rescue and animal welfare is focus on the wins, focus on the positive things to kind of keep yourself going, and don't focus on the stuff that you haven't done. Just keep chipping away at it. It sounds like that's what you're doing. You're constantly just chipping away at it.
Yes, and get together with other people. I mean, you're not alone in this. And look for the organizations. Look, Pennsylvania Voters for Animals in Pennsylvania. Like, join them. Mm-hmm. They'll give you an assignment, and you can feel useful.
I was just thinking when you said about drinking wine when you have Lynn, I was like, well, Penny, myself, Suzanne, Stephen, and Natalie should all get together and we can all drink wine and have cheese together and talk about all the work that we're doing in the animal welfare space. I mean, we're all in the same state. Yeah, that'll keep you going. Find friends in that space, because there are plenty of friends out there in that space who want to make the same change that you want to make. So I'm a firm believer that everybody who is passionate about their work has their thing that they wish everybody knew, their soapbox platform that they really wish that they could just tell as many people as possible when it comes to the animal advocacy, animal rescue, and animal welfare space. What's that for you, Penny? What's that one thing that you wish more people knew?
There are so many people who are saddened by animals in shelters, animals who don't make it out of shelters. And I see so much online sort of lamenting that with emojis and whatever. And I think people feel helpless. And whether it's going to volunteer in a shelter, telling your legislator that you want him to vote for a bill, you absolutely can make a difference. Like, I am not being metaphorical about that. If 100 more people like you made those phone calls, if 100 more people like you went to the shelter and spent an afternoon helping at an adoption event, it would make a difference. And I don't want people to think that, well, my small effort won't make a difference. You foster. You have changed the lives of every animal that you've fostered for. And everybody can do something.
I love that. That's such great advice. Thank you for sharing that. So, before we get all the information about your podcast again out to people and your Animal Advocacy Academy again, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do our foster spotlight. So, as Penny mentioned, she is on the board for the Pennsylvania SPCA. And when we were talking before we started recording about what foster spotlight to do, I figured out and saw that the Pennsylvania SPCA, the Philly location, has a cow available for adoption. And I am pretty excited because this is our first foster spotlight where we're actually talking about a cow. So this is a black male barnyard cow, 2 years old, almost 2.5 years old, located in Danville. And I think that they said the name is TT, which is hilarious. I don't know why that makes me laugh that that's the name for the cow, but it does. So this guy looks like he just needs a place to land. I don't know anything about cows to be able to say what kind of cow this is or what you can do with this cow. But hey, if you've got a farm and you're looking to add a cool cow to the farm, you should probably go to the Pennsylvania PSPCA.org and look up TT and bring a cow home today. Because, I mean, where can you just adopt a cow? I don't know how many places you can adopt a cow. I feel like this is the only one I've come across in the year that I've been doing this podcast. So I'm pretty excited to share TT. So I will put TT's link in the show notes. So make sure that you check it out, if for nothing else, just to see a cute cow that's available for adoption. Right, Penny?
He's adorable. We get farm animals regularly, horses, goats, and sometimes they're expensive to take care of. So if anybody wants to grab them, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Penny, tell us about how people can connect with you and get a lot more information about the work that you do and how they can participate in it.
Sure. Well, the website is animaladvocacyacademy.com. If you want to go see all of the podcast episodes, you just do, it's an option on the main menu there. So it's animaladvocacyacademy.com/podcast. And if you want to grab that private podcast series that I told you about, the 4 C's of legislative advocacy for animals, that's animaladvocacyacademy.com/4 C's, all spelled out, FOURCS.
Awesome. And are you on social media as well?
I am. I'm on primarily on LinkedIn, actually. And Animal Advocacy Academy also has a Facebook page.
Nice. Awesome. So for listeners out there, so you have 2 action items today. Go to the Animal Advocate podcast and make sure you subscribe to Penny's show. I mean, some of her episodes are 10 minutes, 15 minutes of just really condensed, digestible information about what's going on in the animal welfare space. I highly recommend it. And as far as my show is concerned, if you haven't already, please leave my show a review, even if it's a 1-star review and you want to tell me how much you hate me, I will take it. So please leave the podcast a review. Let me know how I'm doing so that I can do better for everybody and it helps other people find the show. So Penny, thank you so much for your time today. We actually did an interview together, and I was interviewed for her episodes or for her podcast. So that's going to be coming out here soon. We're recording this on August 10th. We'll probably see my episode in her feed in a couple of weeks. Same here. Her episode will be in my feed in a couple of weeks. So, but thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. You just are such a wealth of knowledge, and I just love the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Kelly. You too. And keep in touch.
Will do. And everyone, as a reminder, be kind to yourselves and be kind to animals.